Story 1. I opened my eyes and as always, I immediately realized that something was wrong. Unanswered questions rolled over me like an avalanche, and I could barely catch them. Who am I? Where am I? Is this reality or my fantasy? Every morning when I wake up, I ask myself the same set of questions, but the answers never come. And here I am again, a fog in my head and in my ears, one thing still sounds. What if I am not real? Maybe I do not exist at all. Another thought immediately arises. But what if I do not open my eyes at all? What if someone else does it for me, and I am just an illusion created for something? These questions fill the space and do not give me peace as before. But why do I think about this? It does not make sense, right? Maybe I am too bothered, too deeply into philosophy. I have always been the one who can make the world around me change, despite my uncertainty. I could do the impossible, and people respected me for it. They were afraid of me because I was a mystery, and mysteries are always scary. I was the one who could just change the course of events, turn them upside down. And it didn't matter that I myself couldn't explain what was happening to me. I probably don't know why I have such abilities. Why did I, of all people, end up like this? Is this my destiny? To become someone everyone fears and respects because I don't succumb to ordinary laws? Or maybe I was just an accident, a mistake, an eclipse for this whole world. I could control reality around me, create unimaginable things, and I knew that I didn't need to be afraid of anyone. I myself was this unimaginable, strange element that made others worry. But at the same time, I couldn't answer the main question for myself. Why am I like this? Why does everyone think I'm a great person, but at the same time I don't understand what's happening to me? I can't explain how I manage to do what I do, and every time I look into people's eyes, I see them wondering, what is he really hiding? It's weird, but I often ask myself this question. Maybe I really am hiding something, but first of all, from myself. I remember once being told, you are too strong to be a normal person, you are somehow different. But I didn't feel different. I was just a person, with the same questions as everyone else. Why can't I be normal? Why can't I be like everyone else? Maybe I should really admit that I don't understand what's happening to me. I remember having to create these incredible things that other people couldn't understand. I made an anti-bomb missile, and everyone started looking at me with respect, but also with caution. I told them that I could use this weapon if I wanted. I was invulnerable because I could control resources that others didn't even notice. But that didn't make me happy. It was all just a continuation of the same cycle, creating something that brings me respect, but does not leave me alone. And so, I decided to become a teacher. Yes, a middle school teacher. It was a strange decision, but I thought it would help me somehow understand myself. Why middle school students? Because they were sincere, unlike high schoolers, and probably because I could show them that I was not so scary. I could make them see the world through my lens. I thought I could find answers to my questions by showing them the world as I see it. But the more I taught, the more it seemed like a waste of time. They do not ask questions because they are afraid of me. I sometimes think that if I were in their place, I would be afraid too. What could be scarier than a person who cannot explain to himself who he is? And so I found myself again with a new question. I felt a notification appear on the screen. Mission not completed, it said, and I froze. It was strange. What kind of game was this? Or was this a simulation? I began to remember where and when I had seen something like this. Was I dreaming? Why was all this bothering me so much? I tried to interact with the notification, but it did not respond. I tried to say, understood, delete, cut, all in vain. But what if this is just a game? What if I do not live in reality, but am in some kind of simulation that is about to begin? I was at a loss. These are no longer just questions about who I am, but also about where I am. Am I dreaming? A feeling arose inside me that I needed to somehow cope with this. But what if none of this is reality? And what if I have not woken up for a long time? I stood in front of the children, and it seemed to me that I had been here many times before, in this classroom, with these same faces. But I still couldn't understand what was happening to me. It seemed like I was teaching them, explaining what was important, what they needed to know, but inside there was a feeling of emptiness. What was I doing here? Why did I, who could change the world, end up among these people, among these children who were looking at me with questions in their eyes but did not dare to ask them? Maybe this was my job, to explain to them what is most important in life. But who decides what is important and what is not? Maybe I was just trying to find a meaning that did not exist. I thought I could convey something important to them, that I could show them how to change the world, how to find answers to the questions that tormented me. But the more I tried, the less I felt connected to what was happening. They looked at me with respect, but also with caution, as if I was not quite normal, and this irritated me. Couldn't I just be a normal person doing my job like everyone else? Why do I have to be the one everyone fears, the one who can destroy their world if he wants to? I wasn't looking for that. I didn't want to be like that, the one who stands above everyone else. But what do I do with it? With this power, with this knowledge that I can't explain? I tried to communicate with the children, tried to teach them some lessons that I myself had never learned. But maybe they weren't interested in what I was trying to tell them. I noticed how they whispered among themselves, how afraid they were to speak out loud. It irritated me. I didn't know what to do with it, because I had always been the person everyone listened to, the person who could inspire respect and even fear. Why am I teaching children now? Why do I need this? I tried to find an answer to this question, but all I could do was remain silent and look at them. I was sure that someone had to ask, had to speak, but no one dared. I looked at the screen again, and there was a notification that couldn't help but catch my attention. Task not completed. I froze, looking at these words that didn't explain anything, but made me think. What kind of task was this? Who gave it to me? And why was it connected to me? I felt anxiety rising in my chest. Maybe this was a game, or some kind of test. But who was playing this game? I couldn't figure it out, and that made me even more anxious. I tried to interact with the notification again, but nothing happened. No change, no reaction. And the weirdest thing was, I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know how to be in this situation. Why can't I just be normal? Why do I always have to look for answers to questions that can't be found? I felt my body tense up, my mind trying to find a way out of this trap. But every time I thought I had found the answer, it slipped through my fingers like sand. And then I realized I couldn't escape it. I can't be someone I'm not. I can't be a normal person who just lives their life. And that's when I started thinking again about what I was really doing here. Maybe I wasn't here in this school to teach these kids, but to learn myself. Maybe this game, this simulation, was exactly what I needed to understand. I needed to learn how to cope with what was happening around me and how to stop being afraid of what I couldn't control. But what if this wasn't just a simulation? What if this was reality and I just didn't understand how to exist in it? I tried talking to the kids, I tried to pretend that everything was normal. But in reality, I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to do. I couldn't understand why I had to be someone who was feared. I always thought that power should be used for good, but how can you use it if you don't understand how to control it? I decided I needed to get out of here. I needed to find answers to my questions, but not here. I couldn't continue to live in this world if I didn't know what was happening to it. I couldn't stay in class and continue to pretend that everything was okay, when in reality I felt like reality was falling apart. I tried to convince myself that I needed to just keep going and ignore these questions, but inside I knew that was impossible. I couldn't just leave them unanswered. I decided that I needed to get out of this school and try to understand what was happening to me, although I didn't know where to start. The kids were still sitting in the classroom, but I couldn't focus on what I was saying anymore. My words echoed, making no sense, and I felt like the world around me was slowly blurring. My powers were unsatisfying, and I felt like an outsider more and more. I didn't understand what brought me here, at this moment, to this classroom, teaching children who were afraid to look me in the eye. Why was I doing this? Why did I lack a simple sense of confidence? I couldn't find an answer. I had always been the one in control, the one who didn't allow himself to lose face, but now I felt like I was losing everything. At that moment, I decided that I couldn't stay here any longer. I just stood up, grabbed my things, and headed for the exit. My hands were shaking slightly, and I didn't know what to look for behind those doors. The world outside seemed as uncertain as it was inside me. I couldn't figure out where I really was. Reality or illusion? The answer was somewhere nearby, but hidden from me. When I left the school, I felt a strange relief. It seemed like the air had become lighter, but the world around me had changed too. Everything seemed different, blurry, as if I was looking at it through a cloudy glass. Maybe I had been in this confined space for too long, and now I needed to understand what was happening to me. I was sure that there was something more than just what I saw. And then right in front of me, a screen appeared. It appeared without warning, as if it were part of my world. The words on the screen were familiar, but different from before. Mission failed. It was like a bolt of lightning. I couldn't figure out what was happening. Why was I seeing this screen again? Why was this appearing in my reality? None of this made sense. I stepped back and tried to interact with it again. Options popped up on the screen, but they weren't what I expected. Understood. Delete. Cut. Back. None of them were what I was looking for. I could try again. But what if this wasn't a simulation, but reality? What if I'd lost the ability to tell the difference? I thought again that maybe I should just leave. But what if my whole life was nothing more than a task that I couldn't complete? I knew I had to keep searching, but I didn't know where to find the answers. Where was I really? What was I even supposed to do? No amount of power on my part could help me answer these questions. Suddenly it hit me. I needed to talk to someone. Maybe someone could help me figure this out. I couldn't leave these questions unanswered. I decided to go home. Yes, I knew it would be weird, but I had to talk to my mother. She could always calm me down, give me answers, even if I didn't know what I needed to hear. But maybe now she would say something that would open my eyes. When I got home, everything seemed normal, but inside I was filled with questions. I walked up to my mom and said, "I've been thinking about a lot of things on the way here, but I just can't figure out what to do, Mom." She looked at me with a smile, but her answer wasn't what I expected. "I see. That's what they said on TV." I froze. What did that mean? What did they say on TV? What they? Why was she saying that as if I should know what she was talking about? Those words raised even more questions than I already had. I stood in her room, unable to figure out what she meant. What was on TV? I was lost. This could have been some weird joke, but what if she was serious? What if she knew something I didn't know? My mind was racing with thoughts that wouldn't let me rest. I'd always thought she was the only one who could help me, but now her words seemed even more confusing. I thought about the screen and the notification again. It was hard to wrap my head around it. If this is all a game, why do I feel this way? Why is it all so real? At that moment, I realized that I can't stay in this state, in this vicious circle. I need to change something. My head was full of thoughts, and each one of them confused me more and more. I didn't know what was happening, and I couldn't even figure out what to do with this feeling. It felt like the whole world around me was an illusion, and I was a part of it. All I knew for sure was that I couldn't go on living my life pretending that everything was normal. Mom said something strange about the TV, but I couldn't figure out what she meant. Why were her words so unclear? Was this some kind of hint I should have caught? I tried to make sense of her answer, but my thoughts were jumbled. I felt like my powers, which I had long considered unique, weren't helping me in this moment. What good would it do to destroy everything around me if I couldn't understand what was happening inside me? I left the room hoping that maybe a walk in the fresh air would help me clear my thoughts. But the world outside the window didn't become any clearer. Everything seemed as strange and murky as before. The strange feeling that I was in some movie or game did not leave me. My steps on the street did not sound like I was used to hearing, and the air seemed slightly distorted. What if I really was in a simulation? What if everything I knew about the world was nothing more than a fictional reality? This could be a strange game, a test, or even a trial that I must pass. But why was I not given any clues? I remembered the notification on the screen that I had seen earlier, and it made me think even more. What if this really was a game, and I was its main character? But why didn't I remember how I got here? And why couldn't I say for sure that this wasn't just a dream? The feeling that I didn't understand something continued to torment me. I decided to go home and talk to my mother again. Maybe she knew something, and her strange remark was the key to solving the mystery. When I entered the house, she was already sitting on the couch, as if she had been waiting for me. I approached her, and before I could say anything, I felt the tension in my body grow. Mom, what did you mean when you said TV? What do you know? I asked this question, not hiding my concern. She looked at me with slight surprise, but there was some strange shadow in her eyes. It was not the usual mother's look that I was used to seeing. It was a look that contained a mystery. You don't understand, she asked, surprised. You said it yourself. It was in that place you were before you came here. You should have understood what was happening, but you don't want to. My fingers curled into fists. I could feel the panic rising. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I was somewhere. Where is this place? What do you mean? She stood up and came toward me, her face serious, her eyes looking at me with some strange wariness. You still don't understand, son? Her voice was quieter, but every word sounded like it was the last thing she had to say to me. You were in a place you didn't like. You were in a place where there was no turning back. You're still there. You just can't process it. Her words came out in fragments, causing my mind to break into pieces. I stood there, not understanding what she was trying to tell me. What was this place? Why can't I remember anything? Why can't I process what she meant? I felt despair creeping up on me. I couldn't understand anything. I just wanted to get rid of this feeling, this chaos in my head. But the more I tried to understand, the more confused I became. What if I was already in another world, in another state, and I didn't remember how I got there? My mother looked at me as if she expected me to understand something. But I couldn't understand. My thoughts were like a falling apart puzzle, and each new piece only added more confusion. You can't go back, son. You're already here, and you have to learn to live with it, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But I couldn't understand what she was talking about. What did she mean, live with it? What kind of world was this that I found myself in? I turned and left the room, not knowing what to do. All I knew was that I couldn't just continue living in this strange, unreal world. Something had to be done. I stepped outside, feeling the cold air penetrate me, and instantly sharpened my senses. My brain continued to spin as if in a vortex, and the answers I was looking for seemed more and more out of reach. Every step was like walking through a thick fog. Every sound was strange and distorted. What was happening to my perception of the world? Why did everything around me become so alien and at the same time familiar? I saw people on the streets, heard their conversations, but everything seemed as if from another world. I tried to grasp at least one thought, but they slipped away like sand through my fingers. I remembered my powers, my abilities, which I had considered my advantage for so long. But now these powers seemed useless. Was there anything I could do to restore normality to my perception? Could I control the world again, as before? Or was I stuck in this strange, half-muddy place where there was no way back? I walked, and my steps seemed empty. I didn't know where I was going, but I moved forward, hoping for some revelation that would make everything clear. On the corner of the street, I saw a small shop, a familiar place. I didn't know why it seemed familiar, but something inside told me that I should go in there. I opened the door, and the strange bell at the entrance rang with some echo that made me tense up. I looked at the counter, and for a moment I thought I saw something important there, something that could bring me back to normal. But again, this feeling disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on it. I looked at the seller, an old man with a haggard face who was sitting behind the counter, as if waiting for someone. He didn't say a word, but his gaze made me feel strangely uneasy. It was as if he knew why I was there. I walked up to him and asked, "Excuse me, do you know anything about what's happening to me?" The old man looked at me silently and then slowly said, "You need to understand that you're not just here for nothing. You need to realize where you really are and what you need to do." His words were like a riddle that I couldn't decipher, but they stuck in my head. I felt my heart beat faster. What did he mean? I tried to ask again, but the old man only pointed his finger at a strange object lying on the shelf next to him. It was some kind of small black screen, similar to the one I had seen before, but with some new symbols that I couldn't understand. I walked closer and examined it carefully. My hands were shaking slightly when I realized that this was the same screen I had seen before, when I was shown the message. Mission not completed. I felt something inside me begin to change. This was the moment when everything could either become clear or completely confused. I looked at the old man and asked, "What does this mean? Why do I see these screens and messages?" He stood up silently and, without saying a word, handed me the screen. I didn't know what to do with it, but my curiosity overcame my fear. I held it in my hands, feeling how its cold surface seemed to convey something important to me. But what exactly? Why is the old man silent, and what should I do about all this? The salesman looked at me again and said, "You can't get back what you've lost, but you can find a new way. You must return to where you came from and finish what you started. But remember, reality is what you make of it. One way or another, you will face a choice." I couldn't understand what he meant, but his words sank in and stayed with me. I put the screen in my pocket and walked out of the store, unsure what to make of what had just happened. The world around me continued to spin, and I increasingly felt that there was more to this movement than just chance. I needed to understand what was happening and how to take back control, how to get out of this world that no longer felt like my own and find a reality that suited me. I walked through the streets, not knowing where I was going. There was only one thought in my head: what should I do? The old man's words wouldn't leave my head, and I could feel them sinking deeper into me. Everything he said seemed so confusing and so important at the same time. What kind of choice did he mean? Why did I have to go back to where I came from? And what the hell was going on? I stopped when a familiar street appeared in front of me. The same one where I grew up. My eyes were empty, and everything around me looked a little distorted, like a bad movie. But there was an unbearably strange feeling, a feeling that something important had happened right here. My memory was like a blurry photograph, and what I was feeling seemed to be slipping away from my reality. But I knew that I had to understand how it was all connected. When I looked up, there before me stood the old school I had once attended. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could I have come back here? It felt like I hadn't been here in years. And yet something was pulling me inside. I couldn't explain why, but I needed this place. It was like a task I had to complete. I walked inside and immediately felt that the air was different. The same smell, the same hallways, but everything was different. The school hadn't changed, but I felt like I was surrounded by something alien. As I walked down the hall, everything seemed foggy. The sounds of footsteps sounded far away, and everything was covered in a layer of dust, as if I was the last one there. Suddenly, I felt someone's presence. Peering into the shadows at the end of the hall, I saw a figure, vague, ghostly. It was standing by the door, and it seemed to me that it was waiting for me. My heart started beating faster, and I headed there despite my inner anxiety. As I got closer, the figure slowly turned to face me. It wasn't a teacher, it wasn't a student, it was something else entirely. Its face was hidden by a hood, but I could feel it was something important. I couldn't make out who it was, but I felt drawn to it, as if it was part of this whole strange reality. I opened my mouth to ask what I should do, but before I could say a word, the figure raised its hand, and the space around us began to distort. Everything around us began to blur. The walls of the school disappeared, and in their place was something completely different. I felt the ground beneath my feet become soft, as if I were standing on a cloud. Screens began to appear around me, just like the one the old man had given me at the store. They glowed red and showed some strange symbols. "Are you ready to choose who you are?" I heard the voice say. It was strange, like it was coming from inside me. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, but it became clear to me that this choice was all that was left for me. I had to do something with this reality. But what? I remembered the old man's words, his cryptic instructions. He said that reality is what I make of it. But how? And what if I choose wrong? "What should I do?" I asked, but my voice was almost drowned out by the echo, as if I wasn't really here. I felt like this place didn't make sense, And that feeling became even more vivid as the screens began to flicker and show strange images. I saw myself in different ways, as a teacher, as a student, as a person who could do anything. But which of these was real? The figure in front of me slowly lifted its hood, and I saw a face. It was me. Only not the me I knew, but the me who had lost everything, both reality and the meaning of existence. It was the me I was afraid to become. You must understand who you really are, the figure said. And I knew that this was my choice. My choice was to understand what I had become and return to my true self. I didn't know how, but I felt like it was the only way. When I opened my eyes again, I was in an empty classroom and everything was the same. But now I knew I faced a choice. And perhaps this would be the moment when I would understand who I really was. I didn't know what to do when I found myself back in the familiar atmosphere of school. Every detail seemed both familiar and foreign. I stood in the classroom, surrounded by empty tables and chairs, and felt like something important was missing. But what was it? The old man's words, his predictions, and cryptic instructions kept running through my head. He had talked about me having to figure out who I really was, and that was becoming an increasingly unbearable question for me. I sat at my desk and thought about my powers, about the things I could do, and why they no longer brought me satisfaction. I still couldn't believe that I had become a teacher. How could someone with such potential come to such a choice? And why did this choice feel so wrong to me? I was sure that somewhere deep inside, I was searching for something more, something that could give me back a sense of real control over my life. My thoughts were interrupted by strange sounds coming from the hallway. It seemed like someone was trying to get in. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. But there was something in front of me that I hadn't expected at all. It was the figure that had stood in the shadows at school earlier. In her eyes was the same look I had seen when I was in the store. It was cold and penetrating, as if she knew something that I hadn't yet understood. And her gaze was filled with a question. Are you ready to choose? What do you want from me? I couldn't hide my irritation. This had all become too complicated. I just wanted to go back to my normal life, to be who I was and live in my usual world. But I knew I couldn't escape from this. Something was holding me back, and I couldn't figure out what it was. The figure was silent, but its presence was so powerful that I felt a lump in my throat, silencing me. It stepped forward, and the space around me began to distort again. Everything became blurry, as if I was falling into that strange reality again. All I saw were red screens, symbols and images that made no sense. You're almost there, the figure said, and its words pierced my consciousness. Almost there? Almost where? Where was I supposed to go? I felt my head filling with more and more anxiety. I thought I could control everything, that I could find answers, but now I felt like I was on the verge of completely losing the very essence of who I was. Do you want to know what's happening to you? The figure asked. I nodded, despite the confusion in my head. I was ready to know the truth, but I was scared that it might not be what I expected. She raised her hand and the screens began to flicker faster. Strange signals began to emanate from them, as if they were trying to convey something important. I looked at them, and in that moment I realized that I couldn't understand all these symbols without making a decision. You must choose, the figure said. I closed my eyes trying to collect my thoughts. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that I had the power to choose my path, but I also knew that this decision would not be easy. What would I choose? The reality in which I had always been strong, or would I be able to give up this power and choose an ordinary life? I didn't know what to choose, and it felt even more overwhelming. Images appeared in my head. That guy who had been the center of attention, that person everyone feared and admired, and now I was standing here, in this classroom, surrounded by these strange screens and figures, trying to figure out who I really was. It felt like I was at a crossroads, and each road led to the unknown. I felt cold again, not from this place, but from the fact that I didn't know what to do. I was faced with a choice that could change everything, and I knew this moment was decisive. I felt every corner of the room fill with an oppressive silence. It was as if my entire life had become a tangled labyrinth, and now I stood at its intersection, unsure of which way to go. This entire reality seemed absurd, alien, and yet I was haunted by the thought that I myself was somehow connected to this world created for me. But how? Why? The figure before me, without saying a word, seemed to be waiting for me to make a decision. All it did was simply stand there, a waiting shadow, silently urging me to choose. And it was not an easy choice. I knew that if I made a mistake, I would find myself even more paralyzed, even more lost than I was now. I was on the edge, and every step I took seemed heavier than the last. I remembered the old man's words. He said that none of this was a coincidence, that I had to go through this to understand who I really was. But perhaps he didn't realize how difficult it was. How can you understand your own essence when everything around you starts to crumble and stop making sense? I could just leave, go back to my old life, where everything was predictable and understandable. But didn't I know that this was just a mask? That I was really looking for myself? That I was looking for a meaning that was beyond me? I looked at the figure again. My eyes tried to make out her face, but it remained hidden under the hood, and this dark shadow did not give me the opportunity to understand what she really wanted from me. I felt that time was passing, and with each passing moment, everything was becoming more complicated. What if I choose wrong? I asked into the void. But there was no answer. The whole room swallowed me up, and I became truly afraid. Fear that this choice could change my life forever. Fear that I might not be able to go back, that everything I knew would no longer matter. The silence continued. I felt my legs begin to buckle, and at one point I even thought that I was about to lose consciousness. But suddenly I heard a noise. Something in the distance began to approach. It was something like walking steps, as if someone was approaching me from the other side. It was strange because I was sure that no one else was supposed to be here, and this sound kept getting louder. I looked around, and my heart began to beat faster. A new figure appeared before me. It was not like the one that had stood before me before. It was a man, but not quite who I expected to see. It looked like me, but it was not just a copy of him. It was like something from another reality. There was determination in his eyes, and I felt like he had the answers I was missing. This was my chance, a chance to be free. He walked up to me, and a grin appeared on his face, but there was no malice in it. He was kind. There was none of the shadow I had seen in the figure, and that gave me hope. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice firm and confident. It was hard for me to answer, but deep down I knew. This was the moment when I had to choose. I took a step forward and something stirred inside me. I don't know what it was, but I felt like it was the right decision. I couldn't stay in this inaction, in this state of uncertainty any longer. I was ready to make a choice. "Yes, I'm ready," I said, and immediately I felt the world around me begin to change. The walls that had seemed constant and solid before began to dissolve, and I felt as if I myself was becoming a part of this space. It was a feeling of freedom, but at the same time I was overwhelmed by a feeling of uncertainty about the future. Suddenly everything disappeared, and I found myself in emptiness. No corridor, no school, no figure. Only darkness and me. I didn't know what to do, but I was sure that I was on the right path. Story 2. I've been a firefighter since my early 20s. I've always loved the forest. My father, like many men in our family, was a forester and later a firefighter, and he taught me everything I know. I remember walking through those woods with him as a child, and for me it was something special, magical. My father always said that the forest is a place where you feel alive, where every step brings confidence and every breath fills you with strength. I still remember his words. "The forest is your home. Don't forget it." He left when I was young. My mother left when I was a baby, and essentially I was alone. But no matter how hard it was, I never felt alone in the forest. It was like this place was a part of me, a part of my heart. Even after I lost my father, I still found solace in those trees, in that silence. The forest didn't ask questions or expect answers. It just was, and I liked that. As I grew older, I chose to become a firefighter, just like my father. It was no accident I followed in his footsteps. I always felt that working with fire was my calling. I went out on calls every day, always ready to face any challenges, but nothing I had seen in my work could prepare me for what I was about to see. The strangest thing started small. At first, I noticed something moving in the forest, like shadows sliding between the trees. At some point, it became constant. I would have thought it was just a trick of the light or the wind, but it kept happening. At first, it seemed insignificant, but gradually these strange things began to fill my thoughts. I tried to explain it to myself, but the more I thought about it, the less I believed in my explanations. They say that isolation drives you crazy. The life of a firefighter is not about constant communication with people. Most of the time, I am alone at my post, and at night when the shift comes, you often find yourself completely alone. But I knew that it was not because of the isolation that I felt that something was wrong. I knew it intuitively. The feeling was deeper. I could not understand what exactly. Maybe it was all connected with what happened to my father. He died in a fire in the forest, and I was left alone without a family. I was a teenager at the time, and this moment was a turning point in my life. After I became a firefighter, I always tried to find something in the forest that reminded me of him. It sounds strange, but I believed that if I was close to this place, to its spirit, I would be able to feel it. Even when I worked alone and slept in the tower, I felt that he was somewhere nearby. And then one day on one of those endlessly quiet evenings, I started hearing sounds. They weren't like the usual forest noises. The wind, the rustling of leaves, the singing of birds. No, this was something else. It was something you never want to hear in the forest. I couldn't even describe exactly what it was. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was eerie and piercing, like someone howling, but this howl was somehow inhuman. It didn't fit any description. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that it was just my nerves, that it was just my tired psyche, but the sounds continued. They repeated at night, always at the same time, and each time they became louder, more and more frightening. One day, unable to bear it any longer, I decided to go into the forest and find out what it was. That's when I came across the tracks. At first, I thought it could be a bear or a wolf. But when I saw the tracks, I realized that something was wrong. These tracks were too big. They couldn't belong to an ordinary animal. The size was simply enormous. I didn't know what it could be, but it was clear that no creature from these forests could have left such tracks. I tried to follow them, but the tracks led me somewhere where I couldn't go on. They seemed to stop, as if the creature that had left them wanted me to stop. All this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that someone was following my every step, knowing that I was following them. And the more I tried to understand what was happening, the more I felt like I lacked this certainty that had always been with me. But I kept returning to the tower despite all this. Every night I heard the same sounds, and to be honest, I began to fear that one day I wouldn't be able to return home. But I couldn't allow myself to admit it. I was a fireman. I was the one who had to fight the fire. I was the one who had to be strong. But inside, I felt that this strength would not help me in this situation. Every night, the sounds grew louder. They weren't just the strange noises of the forest. They were becoming something more sinister, something I couldn't understand. They were stalking me. At first, I thought it was just a forest animal, maybe some unknown creature that just didn't want me to go where I needed to go. But as I encountered the sounds again and again, it became harder and harder to ignore them. One night after another shift, I returned to my tower. I was hardly surprised anymore that I heard this strange howl. It was so natural to me that I simply accepted it as inevitable. But that night, something was wrong. It wasn't just a screech or a howl. It was something else. Like something was trying to get to me. Something was on the edge. Something lurking in the dark shadows beyond the windows. As I sat by the window trying to calm down and find the strength to figure this out, it suddenly seemed to me that someone was standing on the porch. I stood up, approaching the door, and listened. At first, nothing. Then I felt something heavy and invisible sliding across the floor. At first, barely noticeable, and then louder. I froze. All my senses, no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, were at their limit. The forest continued to be silent, and I felt something obscurantist approaching. At first, it seemed like just the wind, but soon I noticed that it was something much more terrible. It was huge and strong. I stepped towards the door and felt my stomach clench with fear. It was something I couldn't explain. It was dark outside, only the occasional rays of moonlight filtering through the trees. And then I heard it. Footsteps, loud and heavy. It wasn't a person or an animal. It was something more. I stood there mesmerized, not knowing what to do. I wanted to grab a weapon, but at some point I realized that it wouldn't help. The more I tried to fight it, the more I felt that it was useless. It wasn't about power or weapons. It was about something much darker and older, something that shouldn't exist. The sound was getting closer, and I could hardly breathe. My chest was cold and my legs felt like stone. I heard the creature moving up the steps, acting completely unlike any other animal. It was something unusual. The sound of its footsteps was inhuman. At first I thought it might be a bear, since bears sometimes walk on their hind legs. But at that moment I realized it was something else entirely. It was something huge and completely alien, something that simply couldn't be part of the forest. Almost at the same second, I heard the scraping of metal, as if someone was trying to force a door open. Fear gripped me, and I felt something dark stand in front of me. I couldn't do anything. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I couldn't resist it. A single thought flashed through my mind. Whatever this is, it will find me, wherever I hide. I heard the hooves sliding on the ground, and then they became silent, as if the creature had stopped at the door. I knew it was there. I was sure of it. I couldn't move. Pressed hard against the wall, I barely breathed, trying not to make a sound. And then when it seemed that it was all over, that the creature was about to break in, it was gone. The second the sound disappeared, I knew I had survived. But it wasn't a victory. It was a warning. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it would come back. And when it came back, I would be ready. I didn't know how, but I had to be ready. As I fell asleep that night, I could still hear that screech. But now, instead of being afraid, I felt something else. Not fear, but understanding. This wasn't just any creature. This was something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. And I knew that if I didn't act, if I wasn't prepared, the next attack might be the last. I was going to warn everyone. I had to tell them that this wasn't just someone's wild imagination. There was something sinister going on in the forest. These beasts weren't ordinary predators. This was something far more terrifying. But who could I tell? Who would believe me? I needed to find answers before they came to the villages and towns. I needed to figure out what this was before it was too late. After the night I experienced the creature, it was unbearable for me to return to my normal work routine. The forest, which had once been my home and a place of peace, was now a source of unimaginable fear. I could no longer feel safe walking through its vastness. Not only was the creature stalking me, but I began to doubt that I even understood what was happening around me. Every rustle, every sound that had once been part of life in the forest now made me panic. I tried to continue my work, because what else was there to do? But my thoughts could not focus. I replayed what had happened that night in my head, trying to understand what kind of creature it was and what it wanted from me. Why had it left me alive? And what was that strange feeling when I heard its footsteps, how it moved around the tower? I was sure that it knew where I was. It was as if it was playing with me like a mouse, watching my reaction. That day, I had to go check out one of the remote areas of the forest that was often visited by tourists. I decided not to put it off, although I felt uneasy. I had to at least try to regain control of the situation. But every step, every rustle around seemed suspicious to me. I checked the tracks that the man left and was surprised by how deep they were. These tracks did not look like normal animal tracks. They were too big and did not seem to correspond at all to what usually roams these places. I was a little confused when I found several such tracks in different places. The feeling that I was chasing something supernatural took hold of me more and more. At first I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was some kind of large bear. But these tracks were too strange. The sizes didn't match, and neither did the shape. Something was definitely wrong. I continued following the tracks, with no other goal in mind than to figure out what was going on. The tracks led deeper into the forest, and I followed them, as if in a trance. A long time passed, and when I finally stopped, I realized that I was far from my usual routes, deep in the forest where there was no sign of life. My heart started pounding. It felt strange, as if someone was watching me from the dark corners of the forest. I looked around, but I could not see anything. But then I noticed it. From the depths of the forest came the same sound I had heard last night. I froze as if rooted to the spot, feeling how everything around me seemed to shrink. My body was paralyzed with despair. The sound, its screech, was so terrible that I just wanted to run away. But something held me in place. What if I walked away and left this? I couldn't. I needed to figure this out. I walked forward again, trying to ignore my fears. But the further I walked, the more it felt like this was not just a forest. It was something more. And despite my professional training and decades of working in the forest, I began to understand that I could not cope with what I had found. Soon I found more tracks, all leading to one point. This was the place where I knew something terrible had happened. I walked closer, not knowing what was waiting for me behind that tree. The sound grew louder, and suddenly I heard something else. Footsteps. It wasn't just one creature. There were several. I had to literally grit my teeth to keep from making a sound, and my heart was almost jumping out of my chest. I turned around and saw them. They were standing there, hidden by the trees, but I already knew that these were not just animals. They were bigger than anything I had ever seen in these woods. I felt the cold burning me. This was not a place for people. These creatures were not part of this world. My thoughts began to spin. Questions raced through my head, but none of them were answers. What was I supposed to do? Hide? Run? And where would I go if these things were already watching me? I decided I couldn't just leave. I had to go back and tell them what I'd seen. But the thought that no one would believe me paralyzed me. What if I was wrong? What if it was just my fears, my paranoia? But there was something about these woods that kept me from doubting. I knew that if I didn't act, it might be too late for all of us. I started to turn back, but from deep in the forest came another screech. That sound, it was hard, scary, and familiar. The thing was close, and I knew I was no longer alone. Every step in the darkness felt heavy, as if the ground itself was trying to stop me. That screeching sound kept ringing in my ears like the hiss of some inhuman creature. It knew I couldn't escape. Everything around me was saturated with its presence, as if the forest itself was becoming a part of it. Strangely, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was no longer my home. It was someone else's, alien, and I was just a guest who was not allowed to leave. When I returned to the tower, my hands were shaking. I tried to calm my panic, but there was only one thought in my head. I needed to report this. I could barely think about what to do next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here alone. I couldn't just sit back. If I stayed, if I didn't do anything, then these creatures could not only catch me, but also destroy everyone nearby. But when I tried to contact my colleagues, there was no answer. It was more than just strange. It was unsettling. The whole world seemed to be disappearing, dissolving into the shadows of the things that followed me. I soon realized that I would achieve nothing if I stayed here. I needed to find help, but who would help me when the authorities themselves might already be in the dark? I thought again of Mr. Snowfield, of how he had once guided me. He had been something of a savior to me. But what could he do against what I had seen in these woods? Perhaps they would not believe him, just as they did not believe me. What if this was all my imagination? If I had simply fallen victim to my paranoia, my isolation? But I knew I could not make such things up. I continued to watch the forest, hoping for some sign that someone else had noticed what was happening. But all was quiet, too quiet. The forest seemed to absorb all sounds, and I was confronted again and again with this ominous feeling that this place was no longer mine. The problem was that I didn't know who or what was threatening me. I began to notice even more strange things. The tracks that I had once thought were the result of large animals walking were becoming more and more irregular. And not only the tracks, the movement in the forest had changed too. If before it seemed to me that it was simply living its natural life, now I understood that something had changed. One night I woke up again from the same sound that had tormented me before. It was not just a scream, but some kind of deep, vibrating screech that seemed to penetrate into the very soul. It was close. I heard it, and what was most terrible, I realized that it was approaching. I froze. At that moment, I already knew for sure that I could not stay in this place. If I did not leave, if I did not tell everyone, then this horror would simply consume me. I grabbed the flashlight and ran out of the tower without looking back. The forest greeted me with darkness like never before, and although I knew that I needed to go to the city to find help, I also realized that the footsteps I heard behind me were not the sounds of animals. They were the sounds of something else, something that was looking for me, as if it knew that I was still alive. And it was not just a feeling, it was the knowledge that I was trapped. The speed with which I was moving was incredible. I ran, not thinking about the fact that I could lose the way. I knew only one thing. I needed to get out of here. At some point, I heard the same footsteps. The creature was close, and I could almost feel its breath on my back. At that moment, I realized that it was not just chasing me, it was watching me, evaluating me. I ran to the edge of the forest, where the settlement usually began. But when I looked back, a terrible thought came over me. This creature did not retreat. It was always behind, in the shadows of the trees, as if waiting for the moment to come out to me. I heard its footsteps in the darkness as it walked, knowing that I could not stop, could not look back. It was too close. As soon as I saw the first lights in the distance, my heart gave a jerk. I sped up with the last of my strength reaching for the light, but the creature still did not lag behind. I almost reached the safe zone, but when I looked back one last time, I realized that now it knew exactly where I was. I could not stop, even when the silhouettes of houses began to appear in front of me. This was the city, a place where I felt safe, but the feeling of uncertainty did not leave me. Only one question was spinning in my head. How can I manage to get there before this creature decides to come out of the darkness? I heard its footsteps as they sounded closer and closer. He knew I could hear him, that I knew he was there. Every step I took was painfully slow, and every glance back seemed mortally dangerous. When I reached the edge of the forest, I finally felt a brief respite. I was relatively safe, but only for a moment. This thing wouldn't stop. It was watching me, and I was sure it would pursue me until I was at my most vulnerable. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could hear it coming after me, but I couldn't turn around and look at it. If I looked back, I would be dead. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and I knew that if I took one step to the side, I would disappear into the void. I ran despite the fatigue, despite the pain in my legs and the terror that was taking hold of me. When I reached the nearest house, I knocked on the door as hard as I could. All my strength went into this last push. I knew that if they did not open, I would end up in the clutches of whatever was chasing me. After several long seconds, the door finally opened. A middle-aged man stood in front of me, clearly surprised by my appearance. "Are you crazy?" he asked, seeing my state. I could not speak, could not even utter a word. I only stared into his eyes, trying to find even the slightest support in them. "What's going on?" I grabbed him by the shoulders and desperately tried to get my point across to him. I tried to explain that I was being hunted, that I wasn't making this up, but he just looked at me with bewilderment and confusion. He couldn't understand what was happening. It was obvious. To him, I was just a crazy person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He didn't know that the forest held terrifying secrets and that I had become a victim of these hidden forces. "You have to believe me," I said, but his face remained cold and indifferent. He closed the door in front of me, not giving me a chance to explain my story. I stood there completely confused. All I could do was look back again, but this time I knew that the creature that was stalking me would not retreat. At that moment, I felt someone approaching quietly from behind me. I froze, knowing that if I made one false step, I would be in the arms of this nightmare. This was the end. I ran looking back and saw the shadow following me inexorably, how it blurred into the dark woods, knowing for sure that it would not stop until it caught its prey. I ran until my legs gave out, until my strength gave out. I did not know what would happen to me next, but all I could do was hope that I could escape, that I would have time to find salvation before this thing took me. Then I realized one thing. There is no salvation. The forest is not only alive, it seeks to kill. These things are its shadow. Story 3. I used to love sitting on my porch, looking out at the mountain full of trees stretching out before me. It was my place, my quiet place where I could forget about all my worries and just look at nature. I remember how each season brought me a new perspective on the world. Autumn, with its bright colors and cool, crisp air, always seemed special. The trees, painted in shades of gold, red, and orange, resembled a giant blanket that covered the earth. Each day was like a new chapter in the story until the last leaf fell to the ground to give way to winter. Winter, although I did not like it, still had something magical about it. Nature seemed to freeze, plunging into silence. Snow softly falling on the branches of the trees painted them pure white, as if these trees were not real, but parts of some fairy tale. Each tree seemed perfectly prepared to welcome the new year, like a group of bridesmaids in flawless white dresses waiting for their bride. And even though I did not like winter for its cold, for its emptiness, but it had its own beauty if you look at it from the other side. My favorite season was autumn. I always felt that autumn is not just a transition from one season to another. It was the moment when nature showed its brightest, most emotional side. At that moment, it was easy to be near it, just sit on the porch, enjoy its changes, and forget yourself, lost in this endless and beautiful cycle. Every day of autumn brought something new. One day, thick, crimson clouds; another, clear skies and peaceful air. In the evenings, when the sun began to set, the trees began to play with light and shadow, and even the most ordinary could seem magical. I could sit for hours and watch the sunset gradually give way to night. With each change in the color of the sky, with each quiet rustle of the wind, which could seem like a sound in this huge world of silence, I felt how everything around became a part of something big and eternal. Nature knew how to be silent, and this was a miracle, because in its silence one could hear the most important things that were usually overshadowed in everyday life. I could sit there for hours, not rushing anywhere, not thinking about business, not worrying about the future. Everything around was so calm, so purposeful and eternal. Nature was in no hurry. It had no fear. Even when the leaves began to fall and the winter cold crept under my leather coat, I felt that there was a meaning to it, its own laws that I had to follow. I sat on the porch, surrounded by my world, my trees, and the world seemed perfect. In those moments, I thought that everything would always be like this, that it would never change. Time seemed to slow down, and I enjoyed this feeling. Then I did not know that with each passing day, the trees around me were changing, that their silence was a deception, that under this calm, there was an unknown threat. But one day, on one of those spring days when nature was waking up again after its winter sleep, I noticed that something was wrong. I was sitting in my favorite spot, watching the trees, watching the first flowers break through, watching the air fill with the sweet smell of spring, and suddenly I felt that the forest in front of me had become somehow unusual. The wind that usually rose from the mountain did not move the leaves today. Everything was absolutely quiet. Here among my trees, I felt an uncomfortable silence. It was not that viscous, soft silence of winter when the world froze, but rather tense. The forests were silent, as if waiting for something. I tried to ignore this feeling, focusing on how the leaves on the trees began to blossom. It was fun. I watched how nature was filling up with life again, how all this beauty began to wake up and change, and yet I could not leave the feeling of anxiety. I looked at my trees, but now they didn't seem so cozy. I didn't even notice how I gradually began to feel a chill on my skin. It was somehow empty. And this feeling of emptiness was becoming stronger and stronger. It was hard to shake the feeling that something had changed. I couldn't figure out what exactly, but the forest in front of me was becoming stranger and stranger with each passing moment. I tried to relax, to get back into my usual rhythm, but suddenly I felt that something in that place was not as usual. I tried to brush this feeling off, thinking that it was just my imagination, that it was temporary. But suddenly one of the trees slightly swayed. It was so subtle that at first I thought I imagined it. But no, the tree really did move slightly. I frowned looking at this tree. A strange feeling of anxiety came over me. I still brushed off the thought that it could be something serious. I decided to grab my binoculars, which I always had with me when I sat on the porch. I usually used them to look for birds or other interesting things that were hidden from view. I aimed them at the place where the movement occurred and began to look carefully. At first, there was nothing strange, but as I looked, I noticed that the branch of this tree looked unusual. There were no buds on it. It was kind of bare, without any vegetation. It was strange. I thought that maybe it was just an old tree that was past its prime. But suddenly, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that this was just some normal process, the branch suddenly moved. This movement was so strange, so unbelievable, that I could not understand what was happening. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It was not like a branch moving in the wind. It was something else entirely. In the morning, when I returned to my place, the porch did not seem so cozy anymore. That strange moment with the tree did not leave me, and I continued to feel uneasy. The wind was not as warm and gentle as before. Every gust seemed cold, as if something in the air had changed, as if nature was trying to hide something from me. My mind kept spinning about that strange movement of the branch I had seen yesterday. Maybe it was just my imagination, fatigue, or something else, but I could not shake the feeling that the forest in front of me was not the same as usual. I went inside to make myself a coffee, and on the way I noticed how one of the windows began to fog up, as if someone was behind them. There were no tracks, no noises inside, only silence. That strange feeling from the previous day continued to grow. I tried to return to my usual state, but it slipped away more and more, like sand through my fingers. By the time I got back out on the porch, the sun was already higher in the sky, and the light was brighter, bringing with it a new wave of anxiety. Everything was so quiet I could almost hear my own breath echoing in the void. I couldn't stop thinking about that tree. There was something about the way it moved that didn't feel right to me. It wasn't natural movement, not the usual signs of growth or aging. It was something else. I took out my binoculars again and looked closely at the tree. It stood just as it had yesterday, its branches dark and bare of buds and greenery. But now, in the bright light of the morning sun, I noticed something else. There seemed to be strange shadows in the branches, as if hidden beneath the skin of the tree. These spots were the same as if something was trying to hide inside the trunk, camouflaged from view. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what it could be, but at that moment I realized that it was not just an old tree. I couldn't stop. This strange feeling wouldn't leave me, and I started watching that tree again. Suddenly, at the very moment when I thought that nothing would happen, that all my suspicions were groundless, I saw one of the tree branches shift slightly. I pressed myself so hard against the binoculars that it seemed they could crack from the strain. The branch was slowly shifting, as if something was moving underneath it. I froze, looking at it, and with each passing moment I felt fear creeping up on me. Perhaps it was just an illusion. Perhaps I was thinking too much about that strange tree. But I couldn't just sit and watch anymore. Something was wrong. I felt my body tense up, and my heart started beating faster. This forest, these trees, they were hiding something from me. I couldn't just ignore it. I stood up and walked toward the tree, hoping that it was just some kind of accident. Maybe the roots were starting to settle, or I had been alone for too long. I tried to find an excuse for everything that was happening, but my gut feeling kept telling me that I was wrong. As I got closer, I saw that the ground around the tree was slightly raised, as if someone or something was trying to get out. This was not normal. The soil under the tree was loose, as if someone was digging it. The wind was raising a light dust that settled on my hands. I felt goosebumps run across my skin. I couldn't understand what was happening, but it was definitely not natural. Something about this tree, about these movements, was completely different from usual. I came closer, and suddenly, in the very center, in the roots, I noticed a strange crack, as if the tree was starting to break apart. But it was not like an ordinary crack. It was something else, something dark, creeping, that only caused me fear. My hand almost reached out to this tree to get a better look, but at that moment something made me stop. The wind, which a minute ago was warm and soft, suddenly became cold. It pierced me through, as if it itself was a living being. I felt my heart squeeze, and suddenly at that moment a strange sound burst out of the crack in the tree, as if someone, hiding, was trying to say something. I couldn't stay here any longer. My strength had left me. This tree, this forest, seemed alien, unfamiliar. I looked back at my beloved mountain and the quiet valley I once called home, and I realized that everything had changed. Something was wrong here, and I had to find out what it was. Without looking back, I turned and ran back. My head was boiling with thoughts, but the only thing I could feel at that moment was the growing fear that was slowly but surely taking over my entire being. When I returned home, my heart was pounding wildly, and my head was spinning with memories of what I had seen at the foot of the slope. And although I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind, the creaking of bark, or a coincidence, a cold fear settled inside me that did not leave even when I closed the door and turned on the light. With trembling hands, I put on the kettle, hoping that a hot drink would help me calm down. But even a warm cup in my hands did not bring relief, because my fingers still felt the icy touch of something that should not be among the roots of this dead tree. And I clutched my ceramic mug, telling myself that I was just nervous. But deep down, I knew it was more than that, and the anxiety wouldn't leave me alone. So I sat down at my laptop and started looking for any mention of this place. But the more I searched, the more desperate I became about the realization that there was no information, as if this tree had never existed. And even the maps I found showed an empty space in this place without a single mention of the rotten trunk that I had seen with my own eyes, which was illogical and wrong. Because any object, especially such a large one, should have been marked, but it was as if it had never been there. And then I remembered the old ranger who used to tell me stories about these places. Because when I first moved to this town, he was one of the few who knew these woods like the back of his hand. And if anyone could know about that tree, it was only him. So I found his number in my phone and without thinking, pressed the call button. And the beeps were agonizingly slow. But finally his hoarse voice came. And when he asked what place I wanted to know about, I told him about the slope and the old ravine and the tree that seemed to move. And there was a silence on the line so long and oppressive, I thought the call had ended. But then the ranger spoke and asked if I was sure I had seen it move. And when I whispered yes, he let out a heavy breath and said I had to leave right away. And I asked again, not knowing what he meant. But he repeated, "Go away before it comes for you." And his voice was shaking. For the first time I could hear fear in it. And I was trying to understand what he was talking about, asking what was wrong with the tree. But he paused as if he was weighing whether to tell me the truth. And then he said quietly that there were things it was better not to know. And he repeated again, "Go away." And then he hung up, and I looked at the phone, feeling my blood run cold because his words seemed crazy. But deep down, I knew he was right. And suddenly I felt stuffy. I went to the window to get some fresh air, but when I looked outside, everything inside me went cold, because the tree that should have remained at the bottom of the slope was now standing closer, much closer. It was there, in the middle of the vacant lot behind the house, with a rotten, disfigured trunk, with twisted, as if broken, branches writhing in different directions like dying arms. And I blinked, hoping it was a hallucination, but it didn't go away. And I stepped back, hitting my back against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short bursts. And I tried to remember if I'd locked the front door, but my head was foggy. No. As I ran into the nearest illuminated alley, my breath was ragged, my heart was pounding wildly, and there was a hum in my head that drowned out all the sounds around me. But the most terrible thing was that even here, among the lanterns and other people's houses, I still felt its presence. This sticky, ominous gaze that seemed to penetrate through the walls, through the windows, through the flesh and bones, as if the tree knew where I was, and I could not get rid of the thought that it was not just standing near my house, not just watching, but waiting for something. And the fear that had been with me from the very moment I saw it for the first time was now creeping through my veins, poisoning every thought, every step, every movement. And I did not know where to go, who to call. For who could I tell that the tree was following me, that it was moving, that it was outside my house, and who would believe me? But in my panic, in this desperate search for salvation, I remembered the ranger's words. I remembered his voice, full of terror, when he told me to leave. And I realized that he knew more than he was saying. He knew what it was, and I had to make him tell me. And as my fingers hastily dialed his number, I prayed that he would answer. And as the dial tone stretched out, long and empty, fear constricted my throat. But then his hoarse voice came on the line, as strained as the last time, And before he could say anything, I spoke. Barely holding back my sobs, I said that the tree was there, that it was moving, that it was outside my house, that it was following me. And there was silence on the other end of the line that lasted so long that I thought it was as if the connection had been broken. But then he quietly, almost in a whisper, asked if I could see it now. And I froze because I didn't know. But fear told me that it was nearby. It was always nearby. And when I answered, I don't know, he exhaled heavily and told me not to look back, not to look for it, not to try to understand where it was, but to just listen to him and do what he said. And I nodded, forgetting that he couldn't see me, but his voice was so serious, so firm, that I obeyed, and then he told me to move, slowly, not to run, but to walk toward the main road, toward the light, toward the people, and not to stop, not to look around. And I walked, feeling the shadow of fear trailing behind every step, each street lamp feeling like the last island of safety. And each new step was hard to take. But I walked because he said it would be safer that way. But then he said something else, words that made my insides go cold. He said that if I heard a tree creak, it would be too late. And at that moment, at that very second, before his words had had time to settle in my mind, I heard this sound, a dull, grinding, tearing sound, like wood was breaking, like old roots were tearing at the earth. And I froze because fear had paralyzed me, not letting me breathe. And in the receiver, I heard the Rangers cry, "Run!" And I jumped up and rushed forward without seeing the road, hearing this horrible creaking sound behind me, getting closer, louder, more insistent, as if the tree was reaching out to get me. And I was running, stumbling, out of breath, with only one thought in my mind: to get to people, to the streets, to the traffic, to a place where it couldn't get me. But the creaking didn't go away. It was getting closer, louder, and I could feel it creeping into my bones, into my heart, into the very core of my being. And suddenly something grabbed me by the shoulder, and I screamed, turning around. But it wasn't the horrible broken shape of the tree. It was a person, a passerby, a middle-aged man who looked worried and asked if I was all right. And I realized I was standing right in the middle of a busy street, my heart pounding wildly and the phone in my hand, where I could still hear the Rangers breathing, and the creaking disappeared, and the man repeated the question, and I didn't know what answer. Because when I looked back where I had run from, where this nightmare seemed to be, there was nothing there, just an empty dark alley, and I slowly unclenched my fingers, the phone shaking in my hands, and the Ranger on the other end of the line sighed heavily and said, "You made it. This time." I came home, but even behind a closed door, I didn't feel safe, as if the walls couldn't protect me anymore, as if something had seeped through them, something invisible but persistent. And I sat on the couch, clutching the phone in my hands, waiting for a call from the Ranger who promised to contact me as soon as he learned something important. But time dragged on slowly, and the night outside the window was getting deeper and deeper, and every rustle, every creak caused a new attack of panic in me, because I didn't know if it had gone away, whether it had disappeared into the darkness or was lurking somewhere nearby, waiting. But in this silence, filled with my tense breathing, a sound was heard. Not a creak, not the roar of the wind, but a weak, barely audible knock, as if someone was touching the glass. And I froze, afraid to even breathe, and the seconds dragged on for an eternity until I forced myself to raise my head, look out the window, but there was nothing there. Only night, only darkness, only my own reflection, pale, frightened. But as soon as I blinked, I saw it, a thin, curved shadow standing right behind the glass, and my heart sank. The cold gripped every cell of my body, and I realized that it had not gone away, that it was here, that it was not going to leave me alone. And at that moment, the phone rang, and I shuddered, almost dropping it from my hands, but I answered, breaking into a whisper, and the Ranger said only one thing: "You shouldn't have come back." And before I could ask him what he meant, before I could tell him about the shadow outside the window, he went on hurriedly, his breath coming out in heavy gasps. He said that I had to leave, right now, that it was my only chance, that if I stayed until morning, it would never let me go, and there was something in his voice that left no room for doubt. But before I could move, the faint knocking came again. But this time it was closer, louder, more insistent. And when I looked at the window again, I knew that I had been wrong, that it was not the shadow standing outside, that the reflection was not mine, because the eyes that were looking back at me were not my own. And at that moment, the light in the room flickered, and the ranger on the other end of the line swore and shouted, "Run!" But I couldn't move because the reflection took a step forward, passing through the glass, passing through reality itself, and the world around me began to crumble. The walls shook. The air became viscous, as if the space was changing, rearranging itself, as if this place no longer belonged to me. And the reflection was approaching, and when it reached out, when its fingers almost touched my skin, I screamed, tearing myself away, throwing myself at the door. But it didn't open. The handle was cold, as if covered in frost, and the darkness behind me thickened, came closer, and I heard the ranger screaming into the phone. But his words were lost in the chaos, and then I did the only thing left to do. I smashed the window, threw myself into the night, into the icy air, into the unknown. And when I turned around, the house was no longer what I knew. Its walls were stretched out, the windows were distorted, and in the broken glass there was still me, or what looked like me, but with alien empty eyes. And then I ran, without looking back, without thinking, just following instinct, because I knew that if I stopped, if I let him catch up with me, then I would no longer exist. The thick darkness of the forest closed in on me, as if nature itself was trying to hide me from whatever was chasing after me. But I knew it wouldn't help, because it wasn't just chasing, it was playing. It was letting me hope that I could run away. But every tree, every rock, every root that caught my feet seemed to be part of this nightmare, as if the very earth was against me, and I ran, feeling the air getting thicker with each passing second, my legs growing heavier, my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. But I couldn't stop, because I knew that if I paused, caught my breath, allowed myself to believe that it had fallen behind, it would all be over. And somewhere ahead, through the chaos of whipping branches and endless blackness, I saw a light, weak, trembling, but real, and hope flared up in me. Though tiny, though barely perceptible, but it made me speed up, though my legs burned with pain, though my lungs burst. But I ran towards that light, because there was a way out, there was a chance. And when I almost reached it, when I had only a few steps left, I heard behind me a quiet whisper, sliding through the air, penetrating right into my consciousness, filling every thought. In this voice, too similar to my own, said, "Why are you running away? We are one." And those words made me go cold, because I felt like they weren't just sounds. They were something bigger, deeper, more ancient than fear itself. And I knew that if I turned around, if I met the gaze of what was behind me, I would never be myself again. And then I did the only thing left to do. I ran forward, straight into the light. But at that very moment, something grew in front of me, as if the darkness itself had burst out of the night, taking shape. And before I could stop, before I could scream, the blackness covered me, swallowing me up, pulling me down into some unknown abyss. And I was falling, falling into nothingness. And the voice, my own voice, kept whispering, "Don't be afraid, you're home now." And the last thing I heard before everything disappeared, before the world broke apart, was a quiet, emotionless welcome.